Welcome to the first event of 2015 for the New York Technology Council. Delighted to have you here. Should be a fun evening. This is the first event of this sort that we've tried, and seemed like it'd be so much fun I decided to give a talk myself. Let you judge how my failure ranks against the others. Let me tell you a little bit about us in case you don't know much about us. We are a nonprofit industry association. We're 5 years old. Our mission is to support the technology industry here in New York. New York defined loosely and broadly. We focus in four areas principally. Education includes events like this one. Networking, as you've been doing the last few minutes, and I hope you do again after the event. And we also have a couple times a year pure networking events. We work with many organizations in the community. We're one of many organizations in the city and the area that work with and for the tech industry. And we always enjoy working with other organizations and seek out others to work with. We work on workforce development. There is, as you know, a shortage of tech talent in the city and in the country and in the world. But we're hoping to help New York grow and attract more talent. And we also do some advocacy. I'll be down in Washington next month with representatives from tech councils around the country talking about our agenda for this year at the federal level, and then knocking on doors of congressmen and senators telling them what we hope they do this year. And we've also been known to tell Mayor de Blasio what he should be doing. And, he says he's listening. He says he's going to do what we told him. Which is in part a reflection that we said some pretty obvious things, I guess. We put on lots of events, 40 events typically a year. We've got a hackathon in April we do with NASA. And we have a CEO roundtable that meets monthly. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We can figure out if you'd be a good fit for that. And we're a membership organization, so urge you to join. Really would love your support. And we are funded by our sponsors primarily. And we very much appreciate and need their support. This is a list of some of our sponsors. We've gotten enough now that it won't fit on one page. And we thank them all. I'm not going to read all of them, but the list is growing, and it's a real range of large and small companies. And I want to mention one of our upcoming series of events. This is a 9-part series, one a month, starting this month, ending in November, skipping July and August. We're going to talk about financing your company from the beginning to the end. We're starting with an overview on the 27th, and then we'll go into angel financing and pitching and VC financing. We'll end the year with IPOs and then wealth management. What do you do with all that money once you have it? So hope to see many of you there. I want to give a special thanks to Anchin for hosting us. This is a great event space, and we very much appreciate it. And Chris, if you want to say a few words.
Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to give a brief introduction of Anchin, and we're very happy to host tonight's event. We think it's going to be very different than anything we've seen before. My name is Chris Noble. I'm a partner at Anchin, servicing the software and technology industry. Anchin is a 350-person accounting firm with experts in various industries, mostly in New York City and the metropolitan area. We work with startup companies, growth stage companies, and established companies with revenues up to in excess of $500 million. Some of the work we do for them is tax credits and incentives, which is a big area in the technology world, and exit strategies and audit and tax work. So should you have any questions or want to discuss anything later, I'll be around for the rest of the evening. Enjoy.
Thank you. So, as you've heard, this is the first time we've done this. We have 6 speakers. Each of us gets 7 minutes. Alice is sitting in the front row. She will be timing us. There will be audible alarms, and the challenge is to end exactly at 7 minutes. Use every second, but don't go over. We'll ask that you hold your questions and comments till the end. That way we can stay on the schedule, and of course the networking will continue after the event. So one of the things we do is we print programs. I hope you all have them, because that saves us the trouble of reading everyone's bio. So we'll let you read them yourselves. The first speaker is Kayman.
I wanted to be a ballerina. I really did. I failed. Yep. What happened? I asked myself. I started a little late. I was age 9. Here I am at age 13. That was a great costume, right? Yeah. There I was rehearsing as a toy soldier in the Nutcracker in Washington, D.C. Don't worry. The guns were made of wood, I think. That's circa 1973. I was a mouse. I was a gigon, which was a child that came out of a lady's skirt and then went back in. I was a candy cane, a Spanish dancer. Wow, that was great. I went to the best school in town, the Academy of the Washington Ballet, on Washington and Porter Street. It's still there. Ms. Mary Day, the dance headmistress. Oh my God, what a piece of work. She taught Shirley MacLaine, she taught Chelsea Clinton, she taught even the Obama girls, and she taught moi. With one look, that lady could send you screaming in terror, crying your eyes out, or with one word, she could make you feel like you were dancing on air. The foot, the arm, the leg. Hoy. So it was like a Russian academy where I went to academics, classes in the morning, mandatory French, science, math, English, and in the afternoon we danced our brains out, our feet out. We went to rehearsal at night. We performed during the weekends and on the holidays. It was glorious, it was grueling, and I loved every minute of it. Yeah, I had big dreams, thanks to Miss Day and others. I wanted to be, the sugar plum fairy, the swan queen, even a lowly snowflake or a flower. Thanks, Erik. Yeah, that's me. That's a plant, actually. It looks really weird, but look at that costume. That was circa 1976-ish. Great hat. And yes, for one brief, beautiful moment, I was a baby swan, a Cignette in Swan Lake at the Maryland Youth Ballet. And I remember that so well. And after the performance, Miss Day called a bunch of us into her office and she said, "Oh, you look darling, Anne. But you know what? You'll never be a ballerina." That's me, dead swan. At the tender age of 16, my life as it existed was over. I was done. I was toast. I was washed up. So I went to Plan B. This is where my black swan kicked in, big time. You know the movie, right? I set my eyes on Barnard College, yeah, Broadway and 116th Street, because that's where the smart girls went, and I wanted to be one of them. And I danced all during Barnard, and I studied government and economics and politics and Shakespeare and anything I could grab my hands on during the day to be one of those smart girls while dancing as much as I could fit in, and it was exhausting and wonderful. And then I thought, well, hell, I'll go to law school. Yeah, that way I'll make money and I'll have a profession. Because my friends, dance friends who made it, they were drug addicts, they were injured, they were down and out. At least I told myself that. Is it really true? Failure has a funny way of making sour grapes. That's my mom. Don't I look just like her? Isn't that funny? Thank you, Barnard, circa 1982. Thank you, law school. Now, could my hands get any whiter trying to grab onto that diploma? I'm telling you. And at law school, guess what? I performed. I performed at moot court, which is this thing where you pretend to be a lawyer and you go before moot court judges and a moot argument and a moot court, and you compete to win prizes. I won first place, and the lady judge who judged me, I remember the first time in front of the entire class, said, "But Anne, you're too short to be a lawyer." I'm not kidding you. And the whole class gasped. So again, the black swan in me kicked in big time. Like, ha, I'll show you, lady. That's me in the courtroom. So I became a courtroom lawyer. And I performed in court in front of juries, and judges, and mediators, and other lawyers, and whoever else would dare listen to me. Because after all, courtroom is theater of the absurd often, but theater nonetheless. And to be a lawyer, it takes the best of what it takes to be a ballerina. You have to have a thick skin and an iron stomach and fire in the belly and stick-to-itness and diligence and all that stuff that it takes to be a great ballerina. As Winston Churchill said, success means going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And as I look back, my life is just one long series of but-fors. But for my abysmal failure at being a ballerina, I wouldn't have gone to Barnard College. But for Barnard, I wouldn't have succeeded in law school. But for law school, I wouldn't have begun my career in the greatest city on earth, New York. And but for starting my career as a lawyer here in New York, I wouldn't have a stint as a government official heading up business development for the city of New York, where I went on stages talking to thousands of people across the world, talking about how great it was to be in New York. And then I became an entrepreneur, because after all, being an entrepreneur is what, being a ballerina is all about at its best, right? Thick skin, stick-to-itness, ability to withstand rejection after rejection, pick yourself up, don't care, a fearless foolhardiness, a willingness to fail. All those good things are what it takes, seriously, to be an entrepreneur. You all know that. You've experienced it, I'm sure. And what is the nature of failure, after all? I ask myself all the time. Foolhardy decisions, decisions made without data, hasty decisions made without homework, bad timing, bad luck, bum advice, all those things, decisions made from the heart and not the head, and on and on. I should know I've made all of those and then some. That's my baggage. I could fill up all those bags and then many more with all of my failures and mistakes. I could get a PhD in mistakes. I'm a subject matter expert in mistakes and failures. I could fill an encyclopedia of my failures. Look, Ma, there's my baggage. And when I'm feeling really sorry for myself and having a pity party for myself, I pull up that list, and you can too, it's very cool, of all the people, the pantheon of people who committed failures. People like, Einstein was told, he wouldn't make it. Bill Gates, he quit Harvard. Steve Jobs was fired from his own company. Oprah Winfrey was told she would never make it in broadcasting. Even the Beatles were nixed from their first record album, Decca Records, because they were told, well, they didn't really like the sound, and the guitar was probably not going to be a big instrument of the future. the pantheon of failures is wide, and I don't pretend to put myself up in those ranks. I'm on the D list of failures after all, probably, if that. But nonetheless, it's a heartening list to look at if you're ever feeling down. And still, to this day, I dance, mostly in my head, but I perform daily on Broadway. That's my office. Yeah, okay, it's 29 Broadway. It's a Broadway nonetheless. And that's no bull. Sorry, I couldn't help it. Bull's right outside of our building. So I say thank you, failure. Thank you so much. You help give me a sense of, fire in the belly, a stick-to-itness, the ability to look at myself in hindsight and come back. Everybody loves a comeback story. A sense of humility, a sense of pride, a sense of self-awareness, and most of all, a sense of humor. Ability to laugh at everything, especially myself. And I thank you, failure. And I thank everybody in this audience, especially my team, stand-up team, New York Grant Company, because they let me fail every day. And when I'm flying around that trapeze, and I fall off that trapeze, they're like the safety net who catches me every day. Thank you, guys. This is my exit.
Well, that's going to be a tough act to follow for all of us. I didn't bring a costume. So our next speaker is Dan Singer.
It's going to be tough to follow. You're right. No, that's actually my tutu, and just borrowed it for. You're welcome. My name's Dan Singer, and I've been a software developer in New York City for the past 6 years. And I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about failure in software development. Quick gauge of the room, who here works in a technological environment with software developers? Raise your hand. Good, over 85%. And who here would call themselves a software developer, someone who works with this all day? Okay, so about 4 people, great. So this is geared towards people who work with engineers but who aren't engineers themselves, to try to understand why software engineers try to make their systems fail, and why failure is actually something that you seek out every single day when you're building software. So the basic idea behind any engineering system is that if something fails, you can fix it. And if it fails loudly, then you will have to fix it, otherwise it will keep yelling at you. So I always like to say when something is going to fail, you can click here, if you must fail, fail spectacularly. Now, I love the word fail spectacularly. Spectacular implies bright lights and neon signs and explosions and car wrecks. And I really think that that's what should happen to any piece of software that fails. Because if it doesn't, then you're not going to know that it's failing. I can see one software engineer nodding vigorously over here. So a little bit about me. I spent the first 4 years of my career at Bloomberg working with C++, very big, old technology stack. I'm currently working in a Node stack, very new technology, possibly stuff that you guys might be using if you're working with cutting-edge tools, Python, Ruby. These are all, much more flexible and newer systems. Now, when I was working in C++, I had a lot of systems in place that told me when I was going to fail. The standard for breaking in C++ is called throwing an exception, which literally means if you don't handle this error, the whole program crashes and everything burns and falls to the ground. So in those systems, it's very difficult to push something out that fails because as soon as you try, everything breaks. Newer languages like JavaScript don't have this kind of built-in loud breaking failure. And so a novice developer will often make the mistake of, not looking at error codes and just moving right along. Or worse, they'll look at it and then see that there's an error and then not do anything. A lot of times they'll just, write a note to a log and then move on. So, it'll be in all caps so that after your system comes down, you can look at the logs and be like, oh, that was important, 2 days later. So what I want to do is just give you a little example of some tools that engineers use to make sure that when things fail, they fail loudly and they fail early. So hopefully this isn't too technical for people who haven't written code before. This is just an example of a simple function that multiplies a number by 2. So if you look at the top here, this function is called multiply by 2. And this is the JavaScript example, and it takes some number and just multiplies it by 2. And JavaScript is very flexible. It can take anything that you give it, and it'll try to multiply it by 2. So you can imagine an engineer getting excited, sitting down, writing this function, and passing it the number 5, and getting back 10, and being very excited, and then pushing it off to production. And it could run in production 1,000 times and never fail. But then the 1,001st time, some other developer puts in a form that doesn't convert strings to numbers. Tries to pass it, instead of a number, the word hello, or in this case, a string representation of a number. Let's pretend that JavaScript is a little better than it is. JavaScript could then fail on that 1,001st time, even though it worked 1,000 times before. And so errors can manifest themselves very poorly at a much later date than they're written. Compare this with C++, where you can see, looks very similar, but the argument there has a little tag that says int. Int is short for integer. Basically, it says this function expects a number. And C++ is a tool. It's a compiled language that, among other things, has a little checker that goes through ahead of time and says, hey, anytime I call this function, I need to pass it a number. And the way that works is that if you try to run this in C++, it'll throw up a big error before you can even run your code at all. It won't let you put together the program even in the first place. You have to go back and fix it. And so you can see that C++, by being compiled, has these tools that make sure that it breaks immediately up front in big capital letters so that you can't even go anywhere until you fix this flaw. So what does that mean? We can go to the next slide. What does that mean for people who work with software engineers? Well, good software engineers are usually very excited about these sorts of failure and try to use tools that are going to make their systems fail early and often. So, if you're working in JavaScript, you don't have the benefit of a compiler. And a lot of, almost any web product now, if any of you work in web products, are going to have some JavaScript in their code. So how do you deal with this? Well, the answer is you get really excited about tools that do this for you. So there's static code analysis, you could build good unit testing with asserts, and the point is that these are all technical terms that ultimately mean that if you try to put this software in a bad state, it's going to scream at you. And good software engineers are people who get excited about this kind of thing, because if you set up a system where failure manifests itself loudly, then when you inevitably do fail later, at least you know how to fix it. And the other piece of it is that you as a software engineer can actually write code that fails. So you can write code that if someone passes it something wrong, it will actually crash and burn and explode and yell at you. And that's really important because if you want your company to scale, you're going to have software developers developing code for other software developers. And so again, if you're sitting there talking with your software developer and they're saying, well, it's going to take me 1 day to write this, it's going to take me 3 days to write tests, you got to understand that for them, that's writing the best software possible because they're making sure that their code is going to fail spectacularly before it even tries to roll out. And for me, I like to think that this is something that applies more broadly. As someone who's in a CTO position, I unfortunately don't just get to sit in a room and write beautiful software. I also have to deal with all the other day-to-day problems in a company. And for me, I try to always focus on having systems that make failure really, really apparent, where every single person in the company can call out every other person in the company on anything that they think is broken or wrong. And it's the same idea. It's like having a compiler for your ideas and your choices and the different things you might do. Because it's going to go through and check them, and if things are wrong, it's going to be in a good position to yell at you for them. And if you get yelled at enough early on, you can change it and ultimately release a really well-engineered product that isn't going to break once you finally release it. And I believe I have 12 seconds left. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Al, let me cue you up.
That's it, we're off.
We're off.
Great. I don't know how much of this I'm going to use. So what I'll try to do is explain it to you in the 7 minutes and 6 seconds that I've got left. I am a psychologist. I've worked in IT for a long time. I would still be a psychologist, except telling people to snap out of it is not a good clinical style. So as a result, I am in IT instead. At least that was my background. So I ran some IT projects And I have 4 stories to tell you, but before I do that, I want to try to break them out into some kind of a context that makes sense. First of all, operant definition of stupid. Stupid is not something you are. Stupid is something you do. Everybody is equally capable of stupid, regardless of IQ. Over about an IQ of about 115, the probabilities are pretty much the same. I'm talking about all kinds of stupid. Actually, there are 4 kinds of stupid. You with me? If when you wake up in the morning, your first instinct is to check your Outlook calendar, that's one kind of stupid. If when you wake up in the morning, your first instinct is to start a PowerPoint presentation, that's stupid kind 2. If when you wake up in the morning, your first instinct is to work in Microsoft Word because you like templates and structure, that's stupid 3. And if you're an Excel person, that's stupid 4. Stupid is a tendency to do dumb things, often on impulse. And there are 4 different ways to do that. Let's see, I've got 5 minutes left. For the Outlook users, ready? These are driver type people. These are people who focus on results. Built a data center, had to put in redundant storage systems. I suggested, I remember early on, we ought to put one here and one further away because you don't want them next to each other because they're redundant. I remember the boss saying, that's stupid. What could possibly happen in a data center in just one part of it? We should put them next to each other because that'll be cheaper. The week we went live, I found coffee on the storage server, and it had spilled through a hole in the floor above our brand new data center that they forgot to close. Somebody had a welcome to the new building party. They spilled an urn of coffee on $400,000 worth of EMC storage systems. Landed on both machines because they were next to each other. If one had been in the, that's Microsoft Outlook. That's that kind of mistake. If you're an Outlook user, that's the kind of mistake you tend to make. Anybody here have an iPhone? iOS version 8.1. Couldn't wait to get that out. Gotta get that out. People are pissed. They don't like 8.0. We need to fix this. Rolled out 8.1 despite the fact that people at Apple said it's not regression tested. 18,000 people got kicked off, couldn't make telephone calls, couldn't figure out how to uninstall iOS 8.1 and roll it back to iOS 8.0 so they can make their phone calls. Anybody remember this? This was just last October. PowerPoint users make that mistake. You're in a hurry, you're expressive, how you're perceived by other people is important to you. You tend to roll things out before they're ready. Got it? Okay, Microsoft Word users. Let's see, what's this mistake? Worked with a guy in computer security. Told him that there was a hack problem where it was possible to get to anybody's PC over the network. Everybody knew what the username and password was, in fact. Reported this to him. He didn't do anything about it because it didn't show up on his security scan. As far as he was concerned, when he ran a security scan, that told him everything he needed to know about security. If anybody were to tell him anything that doesn't appear on the security scan, it can't possibly be a problem because the scan didn't turn it up. Microsoft Word users make that mistake. They're overly traditional. Finally, Microsoft Excel, my favorite one. Created another security system. It flashed a picture up on a kiosk whenever anybody came with an ID card so that the guard could compare the picture on the screen with the face that he saw. In testing, this worked perfectly inside the building where it was developed. As soon as we rolled this out and put it in a remote office, somebody would come in, they would present their card, the guard would stand there, and the face wouldn't come up for 20 minutes. Right, you'll have to wait. I was in line, the queue just got long, people are standing there, the face wouldn't come up for 20 minutes. First instinct is, this has got to be a networking problem. So you give it to your networking expert, right? Networking expert claps a sniffer on the line, immediately finds problems, works it as a networking problem, spends days on it, doesn't solve it. The problem was actually identified later by a graphic artist, a PowerPoint user. They love that. And it turns out that the pictures we had on file were 8.5 by 11, 6,000 DPI, high-resolution images, where all we needed was a picture this big to fit on the screen. So the solution wasn't a network. Now, the interesting thing, though, about the Excel user is he kept working that networking problem even after the problem had been resolved, because he still saw runts, and he would not stop until he got a congratulations and a thank you from his boss for helping to solve the problem, which, in fact, he did not. Okay, I just have one last point. I've got 2 minutes and 4 seconds left, and I'll slow down for this because it's very important. It's the biggest mistake that IT people make, and that is to assume that people are like machines. machines and people behave differently. I'm talking to you not about hardware or software, I'm talking to you about wetware, which is what goes on between your ears, and that's really what I'm discussing here. Machines have a probability of failure, a probability that they'll disappoint you. Everything about Six Sigma, everything about quality control is about controlling and managing that probability. Human beings have two probabilities. They have a probability that they'll let you down, and a probability that they'll amaze you in unexpected, wonderful ways. The same techniques that you use to manage unpredictability and failure in machines, when you apply them to humans, suppress both probabilities. Are you guys listening to me? If you manage people, please understand the people that you manage don't respond the way machines respond. Bringing the hammer down, tightening the screws, creating more rigor, enforcing more laws, actually works against your interest because it creates unpredictable behavior. People become rebellious in environments like that. I'm just giving you that because some people take 30 or 40 years to learn that. I might be one of them, I'm not saying. And for those of you who are younger than I am, I don't want you to go that long without figuring this out. 39 seconds. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And next we're going to have Mark.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks very much for coming. Let me tell you a little bit about Kepco. We make the best DC power supplies in the world in Flushing. We have a history of turning lemons into lemonade. Next, please. We are Queens' first high-tech startup. Kepco started 68 years ago in my grandparents' basement. It was started by my father and 3 of his brothers when they came back from working on the Manhattan Project. And they had an idea that said at that time that they were going to help, next slide please, that they were going to help teach the new field of electronics. And so they came up with this board on top where you could clip components together, create a circuit, and do an experiment. And they realized they needed a power supply which converts the AC that comes out of the wall to DC, which all of our electronic devices run off of. And so my dad designed a power supply. They built it in my grandparents' basement. They went out and sold them to colleges and universities all over the country. And things were going great. They sold very well. They shipped them. They went back. They asked for reorders. And they got the response, "We love your powers. We love your system. But," next slide please, "just send the power supplies." That's how we became a power supply company. So fast forward 4 decades. Next slide, please. I'm out in Silicon Valley. I go to a garage. A guy's putting together this new micro-based server. I said, "Wow, this is amazing. It doesn't fill a room. This is fabulous." Guy says, "Yeah, but you know, the power supplies I can buy are junk. Do you have anything?" I said, "Yeah, we can do something." He said, "But I need something that's special, that really distinguishes me from everybody else." I said, "Well, how about if they're fault tolerant? So if one fails or you need to do maintenance or upgrade it, you keep running." He says, "That's great." So we came back, we designed these, we started building them, we were selling these like crazy. This is great news. What happens? The customer crashes and burns. So what are we going to do? Next slide, please. So we said, well, let's see what we can do to repurpose the technology. So we had a customer who was building trading systems, and they needed a way to distinguish their product from their competitors. We convinced them that fault tolerance was a way to do that. And so we repurposed the technology. We put it into this rack-mounted system. Instead of fitting in the base of a little server, it now fit in a standard 19-inch electronic rack. And by having this, we sold other products, and this ended up being huge. Next, please. So I had this idea, let's make this a new product, a standard product, because at that time we were just doing this as a custom. Next. Then I ran to the marketing people. They said, nobody is going to buy this. It's too expensive. The standard metric is cost per watt. This is way too expensive. It's too expensive to market. The market is tiny. So instead of just going back and saying, oh, thanks, next slide. We decided in my department, I was running engineering at the time, to do guerrilla marketing. So we decided to do the thing web-based. Next slide, please. We created a PDF brochure. Next, please. And we started talking to customers and adapting this technology to people's needs. So this was, somebody said, we need more power. This was in the oil and gas industry for safety systems. So we up-powered the system and made it bigger. Next, please. And we also learned that to get beyond the obvious people, like the New York Stock Exchange and oil refineries, that we had to have a different way of talking to customers, a different value proposition. And so we realized we needed to start talking to people about cost of downtime instead of dollars per watt. This was a big deal. And we learned this because we got told, no, you failed, this doesn't meet our requirements over and over and over again, until we were able to start doing the accounting as part of an engineering cell, which was very new. Next, please. So we had other people who wanted smaller, lighter, and we innovated and we inspired mostly by our customers' needs. We listened to people. And when we did things without listening, we got whacked. And we had to go back, start listening, and do it again. Next, please. So we tried responding to the market. We shrank things down. We reduced the cube. We increased the power density. And we gave people options. So you could have as little as 800 watts or as many as 6,000 watts. And we started doing specialized configurations. Next, please. So this is one we did for a rocket launcher. It was a fault-tolerant power system with a battery backup. The rockets didn't like it when they were being transported from assembly to the launch pad when the power went down. So this took care of that. Next, please. And this is our latest one, which is us taking the same technology, marrying it up with a power over Ethernet hub to provide fault-tolerant, simple power supplies that are easy to maintain, it's easy to install, and no maintenance disruptions. And we can configure this depending on the application. We learned it had to be configurable. It wasn't just about having one particular size. Next, please. So what did we learn? We learned that repurposing technology often makes us better than we started. We had to find new markets. Air traffic control, tanks, armored personnel simulators, the Alaska pipeline. And we had to respond to where the market's going because this keeps changing all the time. And we have to keep going. Next, please. And what I hope you'll remember about this is that this helps us power innovation. And you may wonder, what does that call box have to do with it? Well, adapting and repurposing technology allowed Kepco to power this system so that you could speak to the dispatchers. Most of the people here aren't old enough to remember when you couldn't do that. And this system kept us safe and keeps us safe every day. And it was this system that transmitted the first alarm on 9/11 that helped the fire department and the police respond rapidly. So thank you very much.
So I'm going to tell you about the first startup that I was part of. It wasn't funny then. It's very funny now, at least to me. The company was called Red Top Company. We were going to build psychiatric medical records, electronic medical records for psychiatrists. My friends would say, oh, I know that company. And I'd say, no, it's not Red Hat, it's Red Top. And so where did Red Top come from? The founder's family had owned a piece of property with a building with a red roof that got sold when Rockefeller Center was built. So they could build Rockefeller Center, so they got a lot of money. Some of that money got pissed away in this company. I joined in March 2000. I still had blonde hair then. And I joined right as the bubble burst. This is the NASDAQ. This is a logarithmic scale. The stock went from 1 to 1/4. 3/4 of the value was lost. NASDAQ still hasn't gotten back to where it was. And I even invested my own money in this. Lots of money. I got paid very well until I wasn't there. And to go after this market was really crazy. The target market was not savvy. This was state-of-the-art technology, so state-of-the-art we couldn't really build it. The customer had very limited funds, probably the last department that any major institution would automate, and the problem was particularly complex. So we chose the hardest problem with the worst market and went after it. We had a sale. It was fantastic. $250,000, didn't even have a product, paid us up front, didn't, in advance. This is fantastic. If that hadn't happened, a lot less money would have been wasted because there was never a second sale. So that was really bad luck to have made that sale because we read a lot into it and there wasn't much to read into it. So we had an office in the Empire State Building. And let me tell you a little bit about the culture of the company. We had what was called Culture Wednesdays. The first Wednesday of every month, you had half a day off. You had to go do something cultural. The company would pay for your admission to a museum or whatever. Well, the problem is, this is what the CEO and founder liked to do, but no one else in the company, except maybe me, wanted to do this. The developers wanted to be writing code. They didn't want to be off at a museum. Plus, this was a very solitary endeavor, so didn't build the team at all, so not a good idea. So we had an executive holiday party the first year. We went to go see Christo, lecture at the Metropolitan, 5 years before the project of the Gates actually came to Central Park. He'd been working on it for 10 years already. The next year, nothing quite so erudite, except that the wine at that party was the most expensive, fastest wine, most expensive wine you could buy practically. The lead angel and the founder were competing to see who could spend the most on wine. Probably not the best way to build a company. At some point, instead of pivoting, we did fork and said, well, gee, if things aren't going so well with psychiatrists, don't detectives have a similar need? And we actually made some progress on this. I'll fast forward, had a meeting the other day with the former, one of the top guys in the New York Police Department back when, and he is still planning to pursue this idea. He's out raising money for it. So may come to something. Then 9/11 came. This is what we saw. We were in the Empire State Building. We were facing east. Well, we went out in the hall, and there was a vacant office. And we looked through the window and literally watched in real time the second plane hit it. And then we decided, well, we got a job to do. So my boss and I hopped on a subway to go to Brooklyn to make a sales call. Of course, the trains didn't get very far. They shut down the subway. But I guess we get an A for effort and an F for judgment. But so the lead angel investor was a narcissist. He had a ton of money, and by the end of this endeavor, he had probably pissed away $5 million. It's a lot of money. This is not, I won't say it's not failing early, because we did fail early, and we failed often, but nobody learned from the failures until after the fact. But the founder and CEO was an even a bigger narcissist. And everything was fine. He was charming. Everything was fine when things were going well, and then when things weren't going well, he wouldn't let the facts get in his way. The COO was normal, a reasonable guy. He had gone to college with the founder, and they were best buddies. They haven't talked since the company ended. The lead architect was a mad scientist, brilliant guy. The architecture was incredibly simple and complicated. Everything was going to be driven by metadata, and when this system was built, you program the metadata in, and it would do anything you wanted. Applied for a patent for it. The problem is that building a system like that is hard. This is a typical development curve. How much progress you can demonstrate versus how much effort you put in, and if you get stopped, if you don't judge well the time scale, at least you're riding up the curve here, and you measure progress. This system had a curve like that. It was all going to come together at the end, and of course it wasn't coming together, but just hold on, and it's just going to be like that at the very end. So the lead developer was a sociopath. And people ask me occasionally, what's the biggest mistake you made in your career? And I tell them, not letting this guy go sooner. He was completely toxic. So we had an interesting design methodology, and that was start over. The developers, the lead architects say, we didn't get it quite right. There's a better way to do this. We get it now. We're just going to have to start over and bite the bullet and do it, and it'll be fine. It's going to happen like that. Except that when they asked how long something would take, at least the architect was honest. He said, I have no idea how long is this going to take, which makes running a company hard. But we probably started over half a dozen times. Payroll, well, we often didn't make it. I didn't have this problem. I didn't get bounced checks because I was on direct deposit, and being one of the senior guys, I knew I wasn't going to get paid this month or whatever. And the angel was getting pissed, and so he would take his revenge by just waiting until like 10 days after payroll and then releasing enough money just to cover the payroll. And 2 weeks later, we go through the same thing again. So I knew I'd have to be looking for a job at some point. So I decided to start wearing a tie. Oops, gotta go faster here. And everyone said, are you looking for a new job? I said, no, I just like ties. And after about a month, they believed me, but I was ready. This is a Aeron chair, Herman Miller, $800. As things are going south, the CEO took me off to look at these up at Steelcase because this was going to solve our problems. If we just had good chairs, we'd be fine. So things got desperate. At one point, the CEO took the tax withholding and the 401k deductions and used it to make payroll. That's not something you do. Then the eviction notice showed up. None of us knew that the rent hadn't been paid in 8 months. The economy was so bad, you'd go 8 months without paying your rent and still not get evicted. So we moved everything to the Chelsea storage and mini storage in Chelsea, including the coffee machine, which was special because it had a counter, and we'd gone through 20,000 cups of coffee by this point. Then we got bailed out, which meant that the Angels bought the company for a song. There was nothing left. It went into court. I submitted a claim for what I was owed. I knew I wouldn't get it, but it made me feel a little better doing so. And green arrow is where I started. Yellow arrow is where they rebranded the company, and the red is when I left. So lots of mistakes. Thank you. And our final talk is by John.
I'll hang out with you. So first of all, I want to thank you guys for having me. And you guys get to hear my fun story about how Linsanity killed my startup. So this is me, sorry, I guess it's not displaying correctly, in 1988, January 15th, on my first birthday. So yeah, tomorrow is my birthday. Hey. As you can see, my parents had high expectations for me, future lawyer. I actually did end up becoming a lawyer, but it wasn't without a fight. I probably started 20 businesses before law school. And if I wasn't shoveling your driveway during the winter or cutting your grass during the summer, there was something really, really wrong. I actually had my first success October 1st, 2012. I had started a tutoring company while I was in college. We started with one tutor, slowly grew. By the time I sold it, we had thousands of tutors. We built a reverse auction connecting students to tutors. So I got a little bored, and I decided I wanted to start a new company. I had really liked the education space. I had met a lot of people in the education space, and to me the next best thing was, I had only sold the license to the education space with my software, so the next best thing was, let's get into the publishing space, leveraging a reverse auction. So January 1st, 2012, I started Right Fit Reading. The goal was leverage something called the Lexile framework, which is a way to determine readability. So you could scan, basically, they put SATs through it. So you could scan SAT exams and they tell you it's a 600 and all SATs are 600s or whatever it is. So they can make sure they're giving you the same level of readability so it's not unfair for anyone else to take the test. I took that technology, I was going to apply it to the public domain books. take Catcher in the Rye, write it on 4 different reading levels, so teachers could teach their class Catcher in the Rye, all the students could read on their own reading level. I vetted the idea, everyone loved it, great. So I started doing it. I did it with Catcher in the Rye first. February 4th, 2012, Linsanity happened, and I had this brilliant idea, and I regret every second of it, but this brilliant idea that Linsanity was going to fund my startup. We were going to write his unauthorized biography, and it was going to pay for everything. We wouldn't have to raise any money. We would have no headaches after this. So what I do, I went into my tutoring system, and I put in a request that literally the next day, February 5th, and I said, can anyone write Jeremy Lin's biography? One of my tutors happened to have been his Harvard classmate. So he got back to me and I said, whoa, I can actually make this happen. So I actually went through my Rolodex. I remembered that I met at a networking event the CFO at Scholastic. I emailed him one email. I said, what do you think about writing Jeremy Lin's biography? I have this publishing idea. He said, I'm in. I emailed one other guy in the publishing space. I'm in. So I got this guy working. Again, the days are a little fudged. I don't remember the exact days from 2 years ago. But February 6, 2012, my partner, from Scholastic, met with me, and the guys from Ingram Publisher Services flew in to New York. We got them super excited about this. I mean, Linsanity was huge. They were going to make tons of money. We were going to make tons of money. Everyone was going to win. So we met with them. We went to this great dinner. We signed an agreement at dinner. They were doing our distribution. The terms were actually not. We were getting like a shitty deal, to be honest, because we wanted to get it done, but it was going to work out. The next day we called Open Road. They were going to handle our digital distribution, get the book on every website out there. Again, they got super excited, closed the deal. It was amazing how much we got done so fast, partially because I connected myself with people that were, had these relationships. A week later, February 12th, 2012, I got the book back from the Harvard classmate, and I put it through my system again. And I did again the reverse auction, and I found someone else to edit the book. So got it edited. It was a really unique, cool way of writing a book and getting it done really fast, leveraging this reverse auction. Of course, we were not without legal troubles. The author who wrote the book didn't want to be a sellout, so he did not want to put his name on the book, so we had to deal with all this legal stuff that was going on behind the scenes. We were able to sort that out, thank God. I actually wasn't a lawyer at the time. My father was a lawyer. He helped me out with all the legal work. So the next step in the publishing process, we got a sell sheet designed, which we were sharing with Ingram. Ingram was going to take the sell sheet, and that's this right here, share it with their salespeople. They were going to go and pitch this book to stores, the Walmarts, the Barnes & Nobles, the Kmarts. There's something called mass market strippable. It's the easiest way to get your book in stores, but what happens is you get back only the cover. You don't even get back the full book because they don't want to pay for the shipping of the full book. So we said, yeah, we're going to make a lot of money. Let's do mass market strippable books. And as you can see, we had 100,000 units that we were printing. I got the cover designed. All this happened relatively fast. I got a couple of my friends to write testimonials about the book. February 15, 2012. This is a video I took. I don't even know if it's possible to show it, but I'll skip it because I only have 1 minute and 54 seconds left. We actually went down to the printing press. I watched my book go through this thing. It's awesome, like seeing all these books there, and the process of making a book. Super exciting. We were counting the money that we were about to make. February 25th, 2012. I got some press. We were on ESPN radio. I got interviewed. We got written up in a bunch of blogs all over the place, and we were again super excited. March 1st, 2012, and again I can't see the date. The book was on digital stores. It was on your iPhone, you could download it. Your Android, you could download it. Every single digital store that existed. Next day, it was in stores. We had it in tons of stores all over the country. At this point, I was already translating the book to Mandarin. We were going to get it distributed in China. I mean, we were we were moving. And then Jeremy got injured and he was out for the season. The day the book hit stores, Jeremy was injured and out for the season. There's not one thing that could have possibly gone more wrong, and we knew this from the beginning, than Jeremy getting injured and out for the season. And I think like the day before this, we all sat down and we said, the only thing that could go wrong now is if Jeremy's injured and out for the season, and he was. So the results. We printed 60,000 books. They were distributed in stores. Again, we had that issue with mass market strippable. We didn't get many of them back. I begged and pleaded with these bookstores, and many, some of them, gave us our books back. After months and months of these books sitting in my distribution centers all over the country, I found First Book, their organization that takes books and distributes them to people in need. And they offered, because I didn't want to pay thousands of dollars to get the books shipped to them, to drive with volunteers to come pick up the books, which they did. And thank God these books are now still in circulation, and little kids are now reading the book in school. So one more slide. And again, we lost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was not fun. And it kind of like many reasons that it happened. But more importantly, let's talk about the lessons. One, networking, I think, is like one of the most important things you could do. I wouldn't have met my partner, who is the CFO at Scholastic, if I hadn't gone to a networking event. I had, met him, I went out to lunch with him, and I kept this relationship going. So things like this, it's just, I can't tell you how valuable it is. And you never know when you're gonna meet the right person. Second, do what you know. We were able to get as far as we got because we were in the industry. We understood how to get what we were doing done. We had the relationships. I mean, there was no way we would have been able to get there without having these relationships. Take risks that you can afford. That's an important one. Thank God we were all able to afford the loss, but take risks that you can afford, and then try to make the best of the situation. So in the end, we were able to donate these books. I do every once in a while see them. I do get a royalty check for like $16 every once in a while for my digital sales, like every 2 months. So I know like it got traded or something happened. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you all. Let's bring the speakers up here, and we're going to throw it open and ask any questions that you have or make any comments that you want to make.
Question for the psychologist. You mentioned the IKEA effect. Could you explain a little more about that, please?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The IKEA effect. You had mentioned that on one of the slides.
Oh, well, let's see. Are we referring to the problem IT people have not understanding how people behave?
Yeah, there was one paragraph which said the IKEA effect.
Oh, the IKEA effect.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That's actually kind of that's a cognitive bias, and the IKEA effect has to do with the predisposition that people have to imagine that somehow they can ignore the instructions that come with the furniture.
Yep.
That's a PowerPoint mistake. By the way, PowerPoint users make that mistake all the time.
I have to say that all of you seem to have gone through a tremendous amount of effort to put together your companies, and you all seem to be very aware of what it takes to make something happen. So in the cases where you saw things going wrong, what really inspired you, or what convinced you to keep going on?
Denial. I mean, in hindsight, we should have stopped far earlier, and that was true at many points. And any one of us could have stopped us, but we also unknowingly conspired with each other to when someone was losing heart, to urge the others on. But that can be great, or it cannot be great. There are very hard times. That NASDAQ curve says a lot about what the environment was, and so at least we were getting paid something, and it wasn't clear how many jobs there were out there. And the angels seemed to have the money, and so they kept investing until they didn't.
I think as a technical guy, with me and my partner right now, my job is always he's the optimist, and I get to be the one who says that's not going to work, that's not going to work. So it's pretty easy for me. Whenever I'm out of ideas, then that means that there's absolutely nothing left. Because if the guy who is trying to bring the idea down can't bring it down anymore, then I'm out of possibilities. responsibilities. And I think it's really important to have both of those voices wherever you are, because someone has to think of the new ideas and someone has to decide if you can do them or not.
I'm a PowerPoint guy, so for me, it's like the fear of failure, feel disappointing the people that I was working with on the project, and I'm a nut, so I won't give up.
I'm a PowerPoint guy, and that means that I like to double down on bad bets. And so my advice to anybody else who might also be a PowerPoint guy is Dan's advice, which is partner and listen to somebody who is not like you. Seek the company of people you don't like and listen to them when they talk to you.
I think it's about having fun. You know, all of those examples that we showed you in the presentation represent literally turning lemons into lemonade, and it's a lot of fun to do it. You know, where you take something that just hasn't worked, and it's fun to fix things.
I think for me, it's just sheer obstinance. My mother was very stubborn, and there's no room for failure, but there's also fear of success, and I've confronted that too. So I don't know. I'm 54, so I'm sure I'm in for lots more failures, and I'm just getting started, really.
So let me tell another story very briefly where sticking with it was the right thing to do. In 1991, I was the AT&T Internet strategist. My job was literally to figure out what the Internet is, what to do about it. I spent a few months at that, went around and met the gentleman who built the Internet originally, prepared a presentation, went to my boss's boss, spent many hours with him. At the end, he said, "Thank you very much, great job, but we're not going to do this. AT&T is not going to get involved in the Internet." And and the guy who put me in that position called me and said, "Erik, keep at it. We'll keep at this. It's going to take a while." It took 3 years before I got in front of the chairman. You don't get in front of the chairman of AT&T. It's going to say until he's going to say yes, because that would be embarrassing for somebody. But he said yes. Next year we spent $500 million building up the internet service. So in that case, which happened before this, sticking with it was the right answer. And so you don't know. I mean, I could have said, "Now this is never going to happen," or convinced them that this internet thing is going to be the future. Very glad I stuck with it. Not so glad this time, but you really don't know till afterward.
Were you at the old Bell Labs?
I was at the labs for 12 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
But I moved into the business side at that point. So I went to our computer business, and then when that total disaster happened, we bought NCR for I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And I helped with that merger, and so.
One of the things that we often identify with what we do, and therefore we identify ourselves at some time with failure. Who were the resources that you went to or relied on to keep you, recognizing that this was, yes, it was a failure, but there's always tomorrow, there's other opportunities. I mean, part of that's within you, but are there other people or organizations that just somehow lifted you, I think is the question, from a personal level.
Yeah, I mean, helping other entrepreneurs helps me, and watching them succeed and giving them advice, because the things that I failed at are now lessons I could teach them what not to do, and the things that I did successfully are things I could teach them, what worked for me. And again, I think you learn more from your failures than your success, but I find the best medicine for me is helping other people and helping their businesses succeed.
Maybe this is pedantic, but I think your clients are always the best people to talk to when you want to know if you're doing the right thing or not. Maybe that's me being the tech guy and saying like, "Well, what do we want to build? I don't know, ask them." But there have been a lot of times where I feel like I built something and it didn't work at all, and I'm like, "Do I have anything at all?" So you hand it to the guy who's going to use it, and they say, "Oh, that's good, that's bad, that's good." Go from there.
I think mentors and gurus, you always hope to have one or hopefully a handful of those in your life if you're lucky. Hopefully one or two at any given moment in time, and they're willing to accept you, warts and all, and coach you through good times and bad. That certainly was a very important factor for me. There's no going it alone. You feel very alone at times, but there's no going it alone.
Yeah, the network really matters. You don't know who it's going to be or what, but as this was coming to the end, got an email. That was a friend of mine I'd known from AT&T. He'd been a consultant there, and he said, "Hey, I'm part of this startup. IBM, Intel, and AT&T put together this Wi-Fi company. Come help me." I said, "Yes." That was my next gig. It died too. We couldn't raise enough money to take that far enough. But yeah, it's the people you know and who know you who will reach out when they need something. And, the more people you know, the better the odds.
I think I've been extremely fortunate to have walked in the footstep of giants, and I had to learn that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, and the better help you got, the better I did.
All right, for each of you, the best piece of advice that you received and the worst piece of advice you received, and on the other side of that, the best advice you've given and the worst advice you've given.
You have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Best piece of advice I've received. Listen twice as much as you talk. Worst piece, I need to think about the worst piece. Well,
I guess the best piece of advice I ever got was the idea that you should think of Moses as the first modern leader, because he accepted leadership reluctantly. He got the best help that he could, and he trained his successors. And I think that's a message that I've tried to keep in my head all along.
Best advice for me was my brother-in-law was a lawyer with the Justice Department, and he was appointed in the Carter administration and survived many administrations, Republican, Democrat, whatever. He was a civil rights lawyer, and he was a trial lawyer, small guy, actually, really. And he said, keep your head down. That means like when everything is clanging around you, and it seems really messy and really ugly, and oh my God, it's very scary, keep your head down. In other words, hunker down, do your work, believe in yourself, and just march forward. Worst advice was, and you suck as a CEO, pack it in, you know? And I almost did that, actually, a few times. Early.
But often you're really on your own. When I was asked to become internet strategist, it was early enough so that it wasn't obvious this was the right thing to do. And I sought out one of my mentors. He was senior VP at Bell Labs, and he'd been a White House science advisor to 5 presidents. And so, what do you think about this? And he says, I don't know. Might be interesting, but I really can't tell you that this is the right thing to do. And he was being completely honest, but you know, I've been hoping to come in and get that nice, simple answer, and said, oh, I don't know. And so I went with my gut.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about failure, for me, the one that I keep coming back to recently is, it's funny, it's if you know the Always Be Closing speech that Alec Baldwin gives, he did a parody of that on SNL where he's talking to a bunch of elves, and the speech is Always Be Cobbling. And I think about that a lot, and it's actually kind of a mantra in my company, because the point is that you often end up with a lot of things that are broken that don't work. And really in a startup, all you're trying to do is cobble together all of the little things you have that aren't worth anything and put them back together in the right place. So like, you know, whenever we find that like, oh, we have this thing that we thought was broken and we thought it was a failure, but actually gonna put this and this and 2 + 2 is 5, you know, you're always kind of cobbling together the solution from your failed broken pieces.
Any more questions?
Hi, this is for Erik. You talked a lot about dealing with difficult personalities in leadership position. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you sort of wiggle your way around it as you transition to the next step? Because one would assume that people will ask you about your previous and how you went about that process.
Well, the problem in not letting that sociopath go earlier was I didn't follow my own rule. My earlier rule was build a nice organization, nice people who could play nice with each other, not the most competitive, but a real team. And then, I ended up in this situation and traded long-term versus short. To let this guy go would have been a real short-term hit. And I was afraid that if I did that, the company would fail instantly. Instead, it failed slowly. The team really matters. I mean, it's probably the most important thing. And it has to be a team because one person isn't going to carry the day. And the team has to challenge each other. Someone in the end may have to make a decision, but the CEO's problem was he didn't listen. He didn't want to hear the answer.
Another question over here somewhere.
Okay, so obviously you guys are all here and you're speaking about the successes you've had, in spite of or because of various failures. I'm somewhat curious about if you've ever, besides in a job interview, because they always ask you about, what about your failures? And then you're supposed to turn it around and be like fix it this way. More with dealing with investors who can sometimes seem afraid of failure because it's the bottom line, it's money. Have you ever, because showing that you're not afraid of failure can be a good thing. Obviously you guys have benefited from it in somehow, but is there any way you deal with either talking to investors, do you talk them down from that, or do you have examples of how you'll transition out of it? Just curious about when talking with people who are, giving you funds and perhaps very afraid of failure, how you kind of cushion them. If that makes sense.
I think you just got to be really genuine and down to earth and yourself, because people see through bullshit. Excuse me, but in this town especially, bankers, investors, are you kidding me? They see people when they're trying to schmooze their way around and not talk straight. It's my experience, both listening to people make pitches at me and me confronting, others who may have my life in their hands,
People got a lot smarter over the last 15 years. This was really dumb money at the time. But the reason it was dumb money is, that curve was spectacular. That rise of the NASDAQ was just, no one had ever seen that before. And there were books being written about how the world had changed and this was the new normal and it was just going to keep going forever. And it became a real herd mentality. And, these bond trader and his colleague had nothing about software. They just want to be, part of the action and make some money and be cool. But yet everyone was drinking the Kool-Aid at the time.
I think that anybody whose money you want to take better appreciate that as good as your plan may be, that there is about zero probability of you actually executing that plan perfectly. And I think you want to take money from people who are more interested in your ability to maneuver smartly when things don't go right. Because if all people are expecting you to do is execute a perfect plan, everyone's going to be disappointed.
Does anybody remember a guy named Ken Olson?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, brilliant, right? I was in the room the day that he told people that he saw no purpose to personal computers, never imagined that anybody would ever want one. Certainly nobody would ever need one. This is the ultimate entrepreneur, I think is how they reported him in Forbes magazine once. They had him with his fishing tackle on and a boat, and they had a really great story about how brilliant he was. And that was around the time he was actually making that speech. And there were all kinds of people listening to him, and nobody believed it. Nobody said a word. And if they had, he probably would have totally ignored them anyway, because he was 100% sure that he was absolutely right. And he was 100% dead wrong. So I think that's a case where somebody lost focus and forgot what customers want. And you can get so lost in the technology and so lost in the investing and so lost in the romance and drama of building a business that you forget ultimately out there, if nobody wants to pay for what you're doing, then you don't have a business.
But then you have the situation where you can say, well, people didn't know that they wanted, people didn't know that they wanted personal computers. People couldn't imagine what it would be like to have a refrigerator that was a computer. And so when you're talking to somebody, as she was saying, when you're talking to investors about something that people don't know that they want, I mean, I'm sure all of you have been in that situation at one time or another. And how do you approach that?
Well, he was saying this in the 90s, I want to say. That was a speech he gave in the 90s,
Yeah,
not in the 70s.
Let me fill in some blanks in that story about Ken Olson. DEC was a major customer of ours, and a sales rep in that territory, his staff was making a fortune selling all kinds of things to DEC. And the guy who ran this organization insisted on allocating each of his people's time, like 10%, to knocking on new doors, because his impression of Olson was he didn't know what he didn't know, and as wonderful as DEC's money was, there was no assurance that DEC's money would continue forever. And so the reason they rode through this, when DEC went sour, was because they had religiously for years spent 10% of their time calling on people other than DEC.
I'm going to jump in also. Almost every investor that I've ever worked with is investing in me, not my idea. And even they've been through some successes, they've been through failures. I still call some of the guys and they still invest in some of my ideas that I worked with in my first startup, that I've worked with in failed startups. They're investing in me. I'm always honest. They know I do my best to get the best people around me. So I don't think it really, as long as you're honest and forthright, it doesn't really matter.
I think really
PowerPoint guy.
I think it really generalizes to a lot of different, that's what management is, right? Is you're this abstraction between the people who want things and the people who are doing things, right? And so investors are people who want things, and one way or the other, they want to make a return. And, yeah, they have to deal with failure, but I think it's a little optimistic to say you need to find an investor who's okay with failure. I don't think that investor really exists. And I think your job as the CTO or your job as the engineering manager reporting to the CTO, whatever level, is to take those failures and figure out how they play into the story of the optimism. And there's no answer, right? Like, the end, is it going to work? Who knows, right? That's what Erik said. But as long as you think that it's going to work, your job is to figure out how the failures sort of aren't actually failures themselves. So that's how you kind of translate the failures into the positivity that investors get.
Everything's really easy in hindsight. In the mid-'80s, this mentor I mentioned put me on a project, a government project. We did disastrously, didn't come close to winning the contract. And the government wanted a survival communication system. It's back in the Reagan years where things were pretty crazy. And they wanted something like the internet. And they said that. And I heard them. And it went right through my head, and it didn't register, and it was 6 years later before I circled back around the internet and said, oh, well, there is something here. So it was right in front of me. I didn't get it.
Any more questions? We have time for one more. That's it. Thank you all for